Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm your host, Dave Cokerhook. This evening, we're going to talk about a subject that's hitting the headlines very frequently. As a matter of fact, I'll just tell you what it is. It's all about cybersecurity. And you've even seen Hollywood getting into the act recently. They've got a new movie out called Black Hat, which is about a hacker. And they've got the new CSI Cyber coming out. So this is like on everybody's mind because it's actually a very serious and significant thing. And with me today to talk about this whole area of concept of cybersecurity is Ron Hemenway. Ron is the president of Cyberbodyguards Inc. here out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And Ron, pleasure to have you here. Thanks for coming all the way down to be with me at Reference Point.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Well, this is a very interesting arena. Both you and I have spent time before this in the high-tech arena. But
Correct.
This whole thing of what's happening with this loss of data or hacking, whatever you want to call it, has been in the news a lot in the last, couple of months. The Sony thing, the new one, Anthem, just got some stuff happening and whatever. What's really going on? How big of a problem is this? And is there a way to protect yourself?
I think that's a great question because I think in the scope of cybersecurity, I think a lot of it comes back to the basics, going back to the basics of how to protect information. What are we protecting? And I think sometimes people have forgotten we've grown so fast and everybody is relying on automated operating systems, applications, and they're not doing their due diligence in protecting information as they should. They're forgetting what they're protecting is data first. Mm-hmm. And if they went back to the basics of protecting data, testing information, processes, having normal standards and procedures in place, we probably wouldn't see the number of breaches that we're seeing currently.
Let's roll this back. So you used the phraseology, go back to protecting. What do you mean by that? I mean, is this, have we moved away from some fundamentals that used to be there in the computer world?
There used to be. There used to be methods, a standard process that we would actually test an environment before we would release it live. Now, one of the things that's changed dramatically is in the advent of the internet. As of 1990, we started pushing information across and allow access into our backyards, our environments. And ever since then, we've asked for more information to be shared. Right. We have distributed networkings. We knew that we were giving the end users more powers than they were capable of managing, right. And we're paying the price for it now. And that's basically what I see as somebody that's been doing this since 1984 is people need to go back to the old processes. They need to actually take the diligence of the first process in planning, identify the data they're protecting, right. And then take the measures to protecting that data first and foremost before they start selecting applications to do that work for them.
And does it make, so protecting the data, and I guess it depends on what activity you're involved in as to what data it is that you are looking to protect, is that?
Exactly. Identifying what it is you're protecting. I think that's key for the first question out of any director of security, any CISO out there should be asking, what are we protecting?
So give me some examples. So let's take a scenario. Let's take the most current one, Anthem.
Okay.
All right. 80 million people got information drawn out of what was supposed to be a secure environment. So what would have been the thought process when you talk about what are we protecting as the key question? What would have been the right answer to that?
You're protecting personal information. That's what you're protecting. You know, you have to look at it from a perspective, sometimes step back and look at it from a criminal aspect. What is the value of the data you're protecting? You know, with personal information, the possibilities for use are endless. You can become the individual, you know, and whereas with payment card, it's a one-time shot. Mm-hmm. Personal information, the Anthem in particular, is going to, you know, you're going to hear about this for a long time, you know, in the near future, and people are going to be having to deal with the wake of that breach for many years to come. And the reason for that is you just don't stop existing. You know, it's not you call and cancel your existence. You are continuing on. And
you can cancel your credit card, but you can't say, I'm no longer Dave Cokerhook.
Exactly. And so the healthcare information is probably one of the most important pieces of information in security that we need to address. And there's many avenues that we can take to try to protect that. One is classifying it, identifying and compartmentalizing that data to lessen the possible compromise. So if they were to compromise and it would have been compartmentalized into small segments, the actual breach could have been contained to a smaller segment.
So let's take a look at this from another perspective. It sounds, I'm not sure how I want to phrase this question. The concept that you described of understanding what it is in a way of data that you're protecting and possibly compartmentalizing it so that it is less vulnerable makes a lot of sense. Is that a incredibly complicated concept? Is it difficult to do? Why do companies like Anthem or Home Depot or whoever it is that recently lost stuff, why are they not doing this? Is it just enormously expensive? What's the reasoning?
It's not. I don't think it's the cost so much as it's simpler to just go and throw another device, another application. Somebody is out there selling a firewall solution, selling an intrusion solution. And those individuals simply want to have a return on their investment. They developed an application that's supposed to allow us to know when we're breached, as opposed to identifying at the root. What is it we're protecting? It's the data. It's not about knowing when the alarm went off. How many times have you seen a car alarm go off and the car's going down the street? It's the same difference. The alarm went off, but it's a day late and dollars short.
Late. Right.
So what people need to do is they really need to pay attention in the forefront of protecting the data and taking some of the older processes that were in place to compartmentalize and lessen the blow of the breach. If there's a potential breach and there had been compartmentalized data, the data would have been lessened in the breach. However, it also shouldn't have been there in the first place if it was properly addressed.
So are the IT professionals in the corporations that we've named and others that we may not even know about that have been hit or that will be hit, do they not understand this?
I think they do. It's a simpler way to handle it. So what people do is tend to go for the simplest and quickest solution as opposed to doing the process and the planning phase in the front of the individual. When they're looking at the data and they're trying to protect the data, there's many aspects out there, applications that are available that will help safeguard the information. One is to remove the data, your actual personal information from the mix. And they can do that through tokenization. We can replace your data for a proxy. And by doing so, you would save an immense amount of problems. If they would have breached the information and all they had was the tokens, they have just that. They have a token.
Yeah.
It's just like a credit card. They cancel the token, it's history.
Right.
Now they have to deal with the outcome of all that data that's loose. What is the information that was lost? They have to scour through logs to ensure what information was compromised, what was the link to it. And again, it goes back to the basic principles. I'm protecting a particular set of data. I classify it, I segment it into smaller segments so that it's manageable, and take due diligence of providing some mechanism that's going to protect it from a vulnerability, such as a breach.
Let's move this from talking about major corporate issues to personal issues, because virtually, well, not everyone, but a very, very large percentage of the people in this country and in the Western world, okay, are tied to the internet. They're doing something. They have computers. They have data on their laptops or on their desktops or on their iPads or whatever, and their smartphones and stuff like that. And how vulnerable are those of us who are not Sony, or whatever? Are we as vulnerable as these other guys, or more so, or what's up?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the power that's on your phone, typical phone today, whether it be an iPhone, an Android, it's a small computer. It's as powerful as the first computers I ever worked with,
right,
if not more so. And they have capabilities to identify and locate you down to exactly where you are within an area.
Yeah, right.
They can trace, somebody can actually, if you have certain devices or certain applications running, they can actually hijack your phone and interrupt the session and basically identify or use your information and eavesdrop. There's a lot of different ways. You have a full-blown computer at your hands,
right,
when you're walking around with a cell phone. And some of those things, you can use those to an advantage too. You can locate, where your children are at.
Right. Well, that's how they promote these things. You know where your kids are. You give them the little whatever it is, so that you know where they are, or you know where your pet is, or you can check your house to see whether the doors are locked and all that sort of stuff. But is this opening ourselves up to possibilities that are unsavory?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the first things that I learned years ago when I first started in security is it's anonymity. You don't know who I am because I have a phone. I can send you a text. I can create my own IDs,
right.
And I can and send anything to anybody, making that look like I'm somebody else. And it's one of the oldest tricks in the books. It's basically, putting a mask on. You see it all the time in the cyber world. They like to have this. Anonymous is one of the better known hack sites. They talk about this all the time. Well, that's part of it. Is there's no punishment for that. They're not having to answer to the moral question: who are you? Why are you doing what you're doing?
I read something just a couple of days ago that the Chinese the government is looking to force anyone in their country that is using the internet or whatever to have their real identity, as opposed to using a pseudonym for anything that they're doing there. So that, which is a shift in the whole way that we've utilized this thing called the internet. I mean, the anonymity component has been huge, and I think that's, before the show, you and I were talking about one of the things that have occurred for the younger people these days is this concept of cyberbullying, where someone can hack into your Facebook page or whatever, and without providing their identity, doing things that are going to cause you a lot of grief. And so, is the awareness of that kind of a challenge creating a potential shift in the way that we allow the internet to be utilized?
I think it does. I think one of the things that needs to happen in our civilization right now that we live in is the people that are using these devices have to understand that there are moral consequences. We can, in fact, it's a communication device. It was designed in order to communicate from point A to point B.
Right.
And if it has that capability, it has the reverse capability. I can find you and identify where the source was of the information. No matter how much you try to erase your traces, it will eventually come to light where you came from. There are too many devices in between every device that you're communicating with, creating logs and identifying where that source was.
It's not just a matter of time. It's not just here to there.
No, it's not. The internet's built on what's known as a mesh topology, and it relies on the closest point for ricocheting or bouncing and transmitting the data. But those devices that you actually are relying upon, whether you're a hacker or a professional, are unknown to you. It's the machine calling the shots, telling it to bounce off of something. And what happens in case of cyber criminals is it's up to us as cyber professionals to go after those individuals by retracing their footsteps, trying to find where, again, just like you would see a video capture of somebody, it was captured on the convenience store down the street. Well, It's the same difference. Is we're going to look at all the devices that are nearby the location of origin to find out if, in fact, you marched across that particular server to get to your target. And it's not a matter of when or who or when we're going to get you. We're going to get you. We'll eventually find out, and it will be proven beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. Now, currently, we're faced with challenges because there are not a number of lawyers out there, litigators, that are having the ability, along with the judicial system. The judges are not as educated in the the technologies that are being used. So it's up to us as people that have been in the industry to educate them in a simple manner as to following that breadcrumb trail. In the cyber world, we can, in fact, prove beyond a reasonable doubt who, in fact, orchestrated the crime or the bullying in this particular case.
This is the sort of thing that your company does, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, wow.
And one of the things that's important, I guess, is it comes down to, like I said, years ago when I first started doing this, I realized that when you're talking online, the first thing that you realize in the communication is there was no morality. People dropped that inhibitions that they thought, I could not find you. And you would see it in the context of their communications.
Right.
And it's very prevalent in the younger children today that are using the phones. They all have cell phones, and they're not worried about taking, you know, illicit pictures or sending something, you know, that they wouldn't normally say in front of their parents. Well, they'll say it now even more so than they would have if it was just a straight communication. And they believe that, well, it's just between me and, you know, somebody else.
Right.
It's not.
No.
It's being transmitted across devices that maintain logs. And whether you believe it or not, you know, everybody that has a cell phone and they communicate and they send those pieces of information, every one of those files that you send are captured in a log somewhere in a phone company.
So it's
someplace.
a copy of the file, actually.
It's a copy of the file. The file is actually captured in that information.
Wow.
And that information can be retrieved if it's necessary.
So there really is no way to stay. What's the word I'm looking for? To take things off. I mean, you can't. Well, if you put, once it's out there, it's out there.
It's out there.
It's not going to.
By the nature of the beast, like I said, mesh, it earns its name from exactly what it is. It's a web. It's a mesh. It has multiple devices capturing that and transmitting that information.
And these devices are like with the server farms that they have at various places. And the only way maybe to do something is to destroy all the servers.
Exactly. And some people out there believe that, well, we'll use encryption.
Yeah.
We'll have a VPN from point A to point B. Well, that's great. But there's still somebody that's providing that service to communicate from point A to point B.
Right.
And if a technician is doing particular work on a server that's routing that information, he could actually have it in a mode that actually allows him to see your information in clear text.
Wow.
Who's preventing that?
Yeah, I guess that's the question. No one.
You know, we've seen recently where we talk about, you know, some of the government eavesdropping on and providing illegal wiretaps in the last few years. You know, you have Edward Snowden over in Russia right now talking about this and discussing this. You know, this is not something that's new to the industry. We've known about this ability for many, many years. We keep trying to provide policies and procedures to prevent that.
Right.
But if you have an administrator that's curious and opens up a router and does maintenance on it, he's going to see your text in a clear text before it's routed on, even though it has a tunnel.
Wow. So there is really no protection.
There is none. So you have to be aware of the fact that what you're saying is actually out there for the rest of the world to see. It could always be exposed at some point in time.
You know, I think that's one of the interesting things that I've talked to young people about who were looking at, you know, they're in high school right now, so they're not all that concerned about needing to find a job at a major company or something like that when they get out of college and they're doing whatever they're doing. That footprint is going to be there. You know, people are going to, in the way you utilize and manipulate. You talked about the inhibitions, and you kind of go down to a more base level if you don't have any kind of moral or ethical guidance in terms of the way you manage some of these things, and that's can come back and haunt big time. I've heard of issues like that,
and it goes down to that. It's a basic. You know, when people ask me, what is it that you do when you do security? You know, and I have a slogan that says, secure it, that's what I do. It's information technology is what I secure. And I always refer back to, you know, the days in the military when I was trained to protect individuals. And I look at data as an individual, it's a principle. And the premises for protecting an individual and protecting data are one and the same. You have to establish what is it you're protecting. What is the value to somebody that you're protecting that information from? Mm-hmm. Where is it? When we looked about, you know, talked about the Anthem information,
right.
Endless. It's endless. It's going to go on for a long time, you know, beyond my years, probably to, you know, accessing somebody's going to get that data somewhere. There's 80 million records.
Yeah.
You know, that's a pretty big pull. Whereas with a credit card, you just cancel the card and it's done. It's over with, you know. So that breach was contained. Now, again, where are we going to stop? What are we going to do? It's criminology. What is the value to the data that we're protecting? And that's why it's really important that we go back to some of those basics. We contain it. There was an experiment done with some psychologists where they put 4 young children in a room and they put candy in a bowl. And they told all 4 of them not to touch the candy. And they might as well have been talking to themselves.
Right.
Now, of course, they believed that because there were 4 characters involved that they wouldn't touch the candy. But what they found was, in fact, they conspired. And they basically won the masses. So one went to the other guy and says, hey, we'll get the candy. I get one and you can have one too. And if we got to get the other ones in. So they basically conspired till all 4 of them agreed that they could take out a piece of candy each.
Oh, wow.
And this is all filmed behind hidden film that shows that that is exactly how the human behavior is. And that's what we're protecting the data from, is the human element.
Right.
Whether it be what we call a script kiddie, something that just wants to be malicious. They want to mark up your website. They want to deface it and embarrass us. Or somebody that's actually looking and seeking for value, whether they're stealing card data, they're stealing patient information or personal information. The value is what dictates to us the level of breach that's going to occur. I used to tell people when I spoke, when I was younger, I used to do some speaking engagements, and I'd talk to people and I'd say, the most powerful tool I have to breach your security is my resume. And it was very obvious because we have all these open-end systems. You have distributed network running with Active Directory, and one of the first things that I identified with was that I could see your files.
Right.
It was out there. Your network was connected to my network, and therefore I could see it. And once I saw it, it was that candy.
Right.
I would eventually drill into it or find a way to get to that candy, and once I had it, I could identify with what your file said.
So how do you deal with this? I mean, if it, and I don't disagree that when you look at it and it's like, ooh, I'd be interested in finding out. It's kind of like some of the companies that I'd worked for where guys were interested. What does John make? How do I find that?
Curiosity.
Because you get this sort of a thing, So it almost sounds like there is no way to protect yourself.
No, there is. It's just like we protected ourselves, for thousands of years from physical breach. We've had the same tools. They're still out there and available. You remove the candy. Are you going to? You're less likely to steal something if you don't see it.
Right.
If you don't know about it, you don't know it exists. There's not the temptation. And temptation is the thing that gets most of the criminals. And it's also what gets them caught because they bow to temptation and eventually they breach the security. What they fail to realize is there are the virtual, video cameras out there watching as they steal it. And those are some of the things that they need to be aware of is that we are watching. We're more vigilant than we ever have been in watching because we're trying to get our hands around how large the network has become. And eventually stepping back, like I said, to some of the basic principles, compartmentalizing the data, changing it over using tokenization, replacing the actual live data with proxy. When we run a test environment, we never use live data.
Right.
Why? Because we didn't have any value to it. It was not real. It was test data.
Right.
And nobody would steal test data.
Right.
Why would they not steal it? Because it's not valuable.
It has no value.
It's the same principle of psychology that says if I replace your personal information with a proxy, there's only the value for the transaction at hand.
Right.
And those are the things that we have to take note of and try to address in our environment. We have a distributed network. We have to distribute the possible risk.
Right. We're going to get back into some of this, but I want to let the viewing audience and you know that we are less than 5 minutes left in this segment of the show. And what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is I've convinced Ron to stick around. We're going to do another segment of Reference Point talking more about this and getting into some things. But I also want to let you know that if you have any questions about this subject, send them to me at info@referencepointtv.com. I'll make sure Ron gets those questions. We'll answer those questions for you as best we can. So, all right. So what one of the things that I've done some reading about recently is this whole concept of the Internet of Things, which is the idea that you're extending the web to devices everywhere, okay, and which open up the opportunity of information collection, and then it gets transferred back to a little hub somewhere that gets someplace else, and so there's different stepping stones to get back to where you have the data that can be analyzed. But does this create additional vulnerability?
Absolutely. Every time you create a new advent to a new technology, You have to go back and again, weigh out the vulnerabilities to that technology. What is it controlling? If I can utilize information to create that device to make an action, for example, let's say a RFID activated lock.
Right.
Well, if I can make one to react to that and lock your doors, what is it that you think makes it so that a hacker cannot unlock those doors with the same technology? Yeah. So it's really important that we pay attention to the advent of introducing new technologies into our home front. Now, there is an organization there's a group of like minds. Electrical engineering is actually the foundation for it, a group called GS1, and I spoke to you about this before. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to identify ways in which to secure the information, the electrical components, as well as the physical components of manufacturing throughout the globe. Because we are a global economy. We are relying on other manufacturers across the globe for components.
Right.
Are we sure we're buying their component, or are we buying a bootleg component that was manufactured someplace else?
Right.
That bootleg component may contain malicious code.
Yeah, right.
And
I mean, that's one of the things that they were concerned, I read that the U.S. was concerned about in buying telecommunications equipment from the Chinese, that they may have something embedded in it that could then be malware or spyware or something like that.
Oh, if we can program a chip, why shouldn't they be able to program a chip?
Exactly.
It's the same difference.
Listen, we're getting down to the point where we've got like a minute or so left here. So what we're going to do is just sort of like round out this conversation. We're going to pick up where we left off when we get back for the next segment, because this whole area of the Internet of Things is something I want to discuss. But also, when we get into the next segment, Ron, I want to start talking about what can we as individuals do to protect ourselves. We're in this environment right now. The situation is what the situation is. So how do I do something to take and protect myself if I'm going to engage in the world that has internet connectivity? What can I do to prevent myself from being in a high level of jeopardy? So that's the kind of stuff we'll talk about when we get back. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're enjoying this discussion. I know I am, and we're going to be back with the next segment of Reference Point to spend some more time with Ron Hemenway and talk about what he and people like him are able to do to try to help protect us in the cyber world. And we'll see you next time on Reference Point.